And good afternoon. I'm so glad to invite you here today in a very insightful session that is going to be, I hope, adding in so many perspective in your very traditional idea and knowledge of IR. And I'm very grateful to Dr. Nazmul Islam, the faculty member and a very esteemed researcher at Yildirim Beyazıt University, Ankara. He's going to provide an insight on traditional soft power and how we in the third world country or maybe a new rising world can see the world global power paradigm in very different way. And I'm very thankful to Dr. Nazmul Islam for his time. I know you are very busy, Hojam, but thank you so much for taking time out. And I am not going to take a lot of time now. Please, floor is open to you. Students are listening, and we are hoping a very good interactive session after your lecture. So we will make sure that students are able to participate as much as possible and they can ask question to you directly. Thanks once again. Floor is open to you, please.
Okay. I think.
And also, if possible, please turn on your camera as well.
Oh, well, I already turned on my camera. I don't know what. Isn't it working?
No, it is not working here. We can't see you.
Okay, so what I have to do, I have to probably I need to join from other laptop. Um. uh, I'm sorry, I just need to take 1 or 2 minutes.
It's okay, sir. Take your time, please.
Yeah, could you please accept my? Okay, I made.
From my side, I hope there is no such restriction.
Okay. What about now? I mean, is it working?
Sorry?
I mean, is my camera working now?
No, it is not visible yet.
Really? I'm using two laptop actually. Why?
If you want to join back, maybe it would be working. Meanwhile, I'm also asking for IT assistance. Now you are visible. Sir, you are visible now.
Okay, which I could just want. Am I still visible?
Yes, sir, you are visible now. We can see you.
Okay, I got it.
Your mic is off, sir. We can't hear you.
Okay.
So your mic is off, sir. Please, if you can start again.
The sound I'm hearing from your side is so low. I'm not sure, like, okay, whether do you hear me? I mean, is it clear now?
Yes, you are clear. We can hear you
That's
clearly.
great.
Please
That's
go
great.
ahead.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Sadia, thanks again. I mean, it's good and great to see you. It's a long term actually after I think a good time, and also to see you and also your I think colleagues and students. I hope so. I mean, I saw some of you. I'm sure like there are more people that I'm not seeing from here. Good to see you all, and good Here is looks like it's still morning. So good morning from Ankara. Uh, yes. So I think we can start to talk the idea first, because the thing what we will talk today, it's basically from my recent book. That would be published from Lexington. It's a, it will be published from USA. And the last year, I had also another publication. It was also the more nearest topic. It was basically about the power of bonding and non-Western international relations. So I'm trying to basically see the non-Western soft power strategy and power of bonding, how it works, and uh, do we really need to look everything from the Western theoretical perspective? If no, then how we need to define the non-Western international relations? And in the case of non-Western international relations, is it enough to identify soft power? Is it enough to identify public diplomacy? Is it enough to identify cultural diplomacy? Is it enough to identify nations branding? So that was the main theoretical replication when I worked this concept. So by looking the first idea, by looking the primary theme, let's say, I mean, when we're talking about soft power, when we're talking about smart power or hard power, why it is important, we have to come up with this idea. I mean, I'm sure, especially in the field of international relations, or mostly in political science or mass communication, the soft power now it's a very dominant topic, especially from the Western perspective. The way they need to develop their attraction, the way they need to develop their connection and bonding with the world and also with their neighbors and also countries. That's the way they made these values. That's the way they made their perception to, let's say, like in a two-way, to attract the other peoples or maybe to confuse the other people. However, the soft power, when it was developed in 1990s, I mean, especially end of the Cold War, we know during the Cold War time, uh, it was the two bipolar world. And in this two bipolar world, it was very clear, like the one way, I mean, especially from the Soviets perspective, or to some extent actually from uh, our perspective, especially from the Asian, we are somehow so much influenced, and maybe somehow we are uh, colonized by Soviet or communist or leftist or let's say socialist ideology. I mean, in terms of, we can say, the state's ideology because of Soviet's perspective. But one thing was very common from the Western perspective. They define it like, okay, the whole phenomena, the whole the philosophical understanding, they called it, it's a fully propaganda based connection with lesser Soviets connections with other countries. Then in 1965, especially from the Western perspective, or more precisely from the American perspective, they developed this idea. Let's say, okay, let's do more work for public diplomacy. And they define, like, let's say, like, from the Western countries, especially USA or like democratic countries, when they're making relations with other countries, they're basically doing their relations based on public diplomacy, while like Soviet Union or non-Western countries or non-democratic countries, they are basically propagating propaganda. So that's their main philosophy. For example, is still there is a great debates in academia. They define the Chinese soft power as a propaganda, and while it is about Western or American soft power, it is a soft power. However, why soft power was needed in American foreign policy? I mean, one thing is very clear, like till 1990s, West or USA, they followed so much the realist foreign policy, or we can say, like, okay, they did their all kinds of foreign policy based on realist behavior or realist attitudes. But after 1990, they need some tools or instruments. In that way, they can influence the other people. And that's the way actually we know that Joseph Nye, the one of the great scholar, I mean, from the Harvard University, he developed this idea like soft power. And in that way, he just said like, okay, US, they do more emphasize on the soft issues, on the issues like political values, issues like attraction, issues like okay, how to pursue other countries' people, issues like how to influence the other countries' people, issues like how to engage with them, issues like how to cooperate and collaborate with them. That was the one of the main topic he was encouraged to. I mean, he encouraged by his writing to the American Foreign Ministry, and he wrote many write-ups from 1994, 2004, 2013, and 17 to just define it like why soft power is important. And of course, like when he explained this thing like foreign policy or political values or cultural diplomacy, he just take the idea from the Western perspective. And how we need to then identify the Western perspective. I mean, let's say like the mainstream ayat theories. That's what we normally as a scholar in the field or as a student of the field, we saw like okay, the field is totally dominated by Western international relations. So it's basically it's like okay, when we're talking about realism or new realism or liberalism or constructivism or let's say um, uh, 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 even any other international relations theory, I mean, exist international relations theory, the ontological things, let's say the basis of this knowledge, or also the epistemology of this idea and philosophy, it actually dominated from the Western methods and Western countries example. For example, uh, whoever start the international relations, they need to follow the international relations from the Peace of Westphalia and 1648, this agreement. They need to go to the European Enlightenment. Of course, this all of the phenomena are really good. I mean, it's really good to understand the cooperation and collaboration with different countries, to understand the why cooperation is important, to understand the why states are behaving like that. In many contexts, it's really important. But the whole phenomena is totally based from the West. So now we need to rethink, especially the IR scholars, they need to rethink again how we need to define this whole idea from Asian or from non-Western perspective. Then again, like let's like my book, then I define again. I mean, of course, like the non-Western international relation is not a new phenomena. Like Amitabh Acharya, like Barry Buzan, some Chinese scholar, they worked very good things on this field, and they also explain like let's say like why non-Western international relations or global international relation is important to define the non-Western countries like China, like Turkey, like Iran, like Saudi Arabia, like Pakistan, like India, for example, because these countries, they have their own ontology of their relations. These countries, they have their own way of cooperation. These countries, they have their own way of understanding. So we shouldn't take the everything the way it has been defined in Western philosophy. Let's say like the way it has been defined in Western liberal methodology, the way it has been defined in Western realist methodology or constructivist methodology. We have to look like okay, whether or are there any idea that is really exist in the society which belong to the non-Western countries, like let's say like South Africa, Kenya, for example, even those countries from the Africa, like Nigeria, they have their own way of cooperation, they have their own way of cultural attractions. Even, for example, I mean, if we see that the Joseph Nye, when he defined, let's say, like when he talked about the attraction, he basically talked something like okay, to make more investment in Hollywood movies. I mean, from the American perspective, he defined, let's say, like okay, we need soft power because we have our own way of culture, we have our own way of political values, let's say like democracy, and based on those kind of phenomena, positive phenomenon, we can make influence on others. But if we see, for example, I mean, the countries like China, like the countries like Turkey, they are developing their own way of political values, their own way of history, their own way of civilization. So when they're making their relations, let's say Turkey want to make a relations with Pakistan, I mean, it's not important. They always need to follow like, okay, whether Pakistan have let's say that the philosophical things, let's say democratic tools that should to be like Western way of understanding, or also the Western political formula, or maybe the way of the culture, what West thinks from their liberal perspective. It's not important for Turkey. It's not even important for China. Even to some extent, it's not important for Iran. Even it's not important for Pakistan. So they need to see their own way of relation. They need to see like, okay, how they can make their own way of cooperation. And through this process, I mean, let's by defining these one-to-one countries, I just try to criticize the all the exist international relations theories and to look why we need a new philosophy in this field. And I just can, I mean, talk about the power of bonding. This is the one of the concept that I argued. Let's say the power of bonding is one of the crucial things that can happen, or is happening, or happened in the history through or within non-Western countries. The question is how. For example, let's say in a history, let's say if we talk the Chinese civilization or Chinese history, nearly 5,000 years of civilization, or let's take the like Iran or their Persian Empire, Safavid Empire, or any other historical things. And also if we take the Turkish Ottoman Empire, or if we take the, let's say like to some extent, I mean, the Indus civilization, all of this civilization, you will see, I mean, the way we have seen the European context, like the conflict, blood, violence, especially in the or during the medieval age, it was not happening here. I mean, for example, China and Iran, I mean, since, I mean, or in their history, it was very rare case we can identify they had direct conflict. So this is the one of the important thing to identify how these two countries, within their long years of history, they made their cooperation without direct confrontation and without conflict. So that called, let's say they have some ontological things. That's the way they make their cooperation. That's the way they made their interaction without any kind of conflict. For example, I mean, we can talk something, let's say the England and France, they had 100 years of war. We can talk about France and Germany, they have a long terms of conflict. I mean, also in many European countries during the Dark Ages and medieval ages, we can find out long terms of blood, conflict, and war. But if we take the same phenomenon from this civilization, from the China to Iran to these many non-Western countries and Asian countries, you will see it is not actually happened like that way, because the way they made their relations, it was mostly soft relation. It was mostly based on trade relations. It was mostly based on the cultural relations. For example, to define these things, we can take this idea again. For example, why from the US or American or any Western perspective, the history or civilization is not that much important. Let's talk, uh, let's say like the US, if they want to make a good relations with Pakistan, they need to look what is going on now. They need to make their all kinds of cooperation and collaboration based on their contemporary perspective. What is their importance, how they need to make relations. I mean, all of the things that is totally depend on uh, present times materials or instruments and tools. But from the perspective of China or from the Turkey, they can easily move from the history and they can define it. Let's say like, okay, we the people, we live together here and we have our own way of bonding without any kind of conflict and without any kind of things. And that's the main difference of here. I mean, that's the way we need to define what's the main difference of Western perspective of international relations and non-Western perspective of international relations, or Western perspective of foreign policy interests and non-Western perspective of foreign policy interests. For example, if we see the contemporary times, I saw like, if I'm not wrong, probably you have also one discussion on Chinese public diplomacy. So you already have a good idea, let's say, like, okay, how China is working and their public diplomacy and their institutes like Confucius Institute, like their programs in education, special educational program, their ministry, their let's say embassy, their leaders, their works to other countries, and also many other process. For example, we know, I mean, especially from the Chinese perspective, from 2013, it was one of the crucial point that China made a step. I mean, the Belt and Road Initiative. I mean, so far, I mean, if we look till now, it's more than 150 countries are the member of Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. But the thing is here, China, they just want to develop their own way of philosophy, own way of connection and bonding. They want to see, like, okay, our country from Africa, or our country from Eurasia, or our country from Latin America, each should to look their relations and collaboration from the Chinese perspective, not from the Western perspective. And that's the way they develop their own philosophy. That's the way they develop their understanding of, okay, peaceful rise or harmonious society. And that's their philosophy. We may disagree, we may make some critics about that. Okay, that's the way that China is really following harmonious society or peaceful rise or so-called development or so-called investment in other countries, so-called cooperation in other countries. Maybe we can find many criticism, but in reality, China, firstly, they did their own philosophy of understanding of foreign policy, of cooperation, and that peaceful rise or harmonious society inside their China's development or Chinese rise. It's important to understand the Chinese way of cooperation, Chinese way of international relations. Let's say like India, for example. India, let's I mean, is also the very interesting country. I mean, to this extent, I mean, India, when they are making their relations, especially in a South Asia, let's take some small countries, for example, Nepal or Bangladesh, or to some extent like Myanmar, they are developing their idea from their own way of their power of bonding, or their, let's say, like their way of soft power. I mean, we may have, let's say, like, okay, I mean, whether this soft power is related from the Western soft power, the simple answer is no, because they are trying to make their own influence. And sometimes the problem is here, especially the non-Western countries, that could be the one of the criticism, like India, like China, when they're making their cooperation, when they're making their soft power, a public diplomacy in other countries, they are somehow uh, uh, following their country's interest without rule-based international order, without, let's say, rule-based for law or rule-based policy. That's the one of the problem, because let's say, like, okay, the India unipolar policy in Bangladesh, or Chinese unipolar policy in Pakistan, let's say, I mean, from these two countries' perspective, that could be crucial. Some scholar, they may say, okay, it's a good example of soft power, but for the other scholar, they may say, like, it's another hegemony, or we can say, like, if you want to take the idea from the Gramsci, let's say, the cultural hegemony. So we may talk again, like, whether the Chinese engagement with Pakistan or India's engagement with Bangladesh, is it really soft power? Is it really the power of bonding, or it is another tool of cultural hegemony? That's a good debate. That could be the future works. I mean, let's say, like, for example, one of my work, it's now I'm focusing something related with the soft power tool, like power bonding, whether it could be or it will be another tool of new colonialism. So let's say, like, once upon a time, or in the contemporary international politics, USA, they use their liberal idea, let's say democracy, human rights, equality, fraternity, or even the tool of LGBTQ, for example. To many extent, it is actually the part of American foreign policy interest. So they use this soft tool for the sake of their foreign policy interest. But on the other way, when we are talking these things from the philosophy perspective, we are looking those things as a soft power tool. We are analyzing this tool. Oh, okay, US is talking about democracy, or Western countries, they talk more about human rights. So it's a part of the soft power. The same way, China, they're talking more about their economic attraction. They're talking more about economic investment. They're talking more about the trade investment. So in future, can we say like something like China, they are going to make same colony what many non-Western countries they faced from the Western countries, especially from the USA, because USA they also use their soft power tool to control or to establish their hegemony on other countries, but in a soft way, but in a attractive way. That's the US's perspective. But also the China, they are doing the same thing. Also the India, they are doing the same thing. But here is a thing. For example, one thing is very interesting. If we take the example like Turkey, Turkey in recent times, I'm sure all of you follow the Turkish foreign policy in recent times. If we take this only last 10 years narratives of Turkish foreign policy, or take the discourses of Turkish foreign policy, one thing you will find Turkey want to develop their foreign policy based on humanitarian diplomacy. So what does it mean, the humanitarian diplomacy? That could be the one of the tool of the power of bonding. I mean, Turkey, if we take, I mean, Turkey, they have now a very good interaction and collaboration with Somalia, with Qatar, and also, I mean, they have, we can say like a very good smart power policy in Libya, in Syria, in Iraq, and also, I mean, to some extent, very soft engagement in many Central Asian countries. So the thing here, I mean, we know when we're talking any kind of theories in international politics or international collaboration and cooperation, two things are important for us. I mean, whether we are making community by making this kind of, let's say like this kind of idea. And the second thing, how we are utilizing that community to establish order. I mean, order means like, okay, to establish justice, to establish international law, to establish, I mean, rule-based cooperation. So by looking at this issue, I mean, we cannot say like that Turkey is really a good example to be a successful country. But one thing they established, yes, we have a realist interest from other countries, but the way we are making our negotiation, the way we are making our collaboration, that's the tool of humanitarian diplomacy. So for example, we are trying to help them. Let's say like we are going to go to the Central Asian countries by making our identity, and that could be ethnic identity, that could be religious identity. I mean, that's what we normally understand from the constructivism, let's say, to develop identity. So Turkey is doing these things from the humanitarian perspective. Let's say they went to Somalia, they established, I mean, in recent phenomena, we know they established military base, and also we saw they have some hard phenomenon in these countries, but it's still, I mean, if we look the chronology of the Turkish Somalia's relations, it is totally based on humanitarian diplomacy. They first try to, I mean, made their role to develop that state. They first try to do something, that's the way they can furnish, they can do something really great for that particular country. That was their strategy, and that was the soft power. I mean, they are not talking like, okay, the Somalia need to be a very, I mean, liberal or democratic, or they should ensure this thing, that thing, the way we have seen from the Western or American perspective. So that's why I think that when we're talking about the non-Western countries, Turkey could be the good example. And also the other countries, for example, I mean, we can talk about Saudi Arabia. I mean, interestingly, Saudi Arabia now they are making mixing policy. For example, we know since 1980 to 2000, let's say 15, Saudi Arabia's philosophy of their collaboration, it was based on purely religion, and they also took the side. I mean, they used their religious perspective as a tool of the soft power. Let's say it could be their idea of Salafism or Wahhabism or anything. They utilize it as their tool of soft power, and that's the way they made their cooperation. But after 2015, they now took the many Western liberal ideas and try to make their influence on other Muslim countries, especially in the Gulf and Middle Eastern countries, and to some extent from the African and Asian Muslim countries. And that's the way they make their mixed policy. Okay, we may have some religious tools of soft power, but again, we are making this mixing liberal ideas to make cooperation on other Muslim countries. For example, we can say like the one of the great example to understand the non-Western way of understanding. Let's say Qatar, for example, it's a kingdom-based or monarchic countries, but it's still like by taking any example. Of course, we need a huge time to identify how we are defining the Qatar soft power. Let's say Qatar soft power in Afghanistan during the Taliban and that peacemaking process. Qatar soft power, even also now in Israel-Palestine issue, especially to deal with the Israel, and also in many diplomatic role that Qatar played, and also from the media's perspective. Does the Qatar did their great job through their media like Al Jazeera? So is there one way? I mean, if we read again the hypothesis of the Joseph Nye or any Western scholar, they said like, okay, if a country really want to develop their soft power and good public diplomacy, the country should to be democratic country. But in reality, it is not important. In reality, let's say like, the Qatar or Saudi Arabia, even Iran, for example, we may criticize from many perspectives, but Iran, we have seen they are developing their own way of soft engagement. They're developing their own way of soft cooperation. Every militia group in Middle Eastern countries, we can take militias from Iraq, from Syria, even also many groups like say, who are motivated from let's say Shia doctrine or that ideology. To many extent, actually, it's a Iran's soft power. It's a Iran's own style of their cooperation. They're not taking this idea like, okay, we really need to develop our own soft power by looking the Western philosophy. So that's the main difference, because I mean that's even the main questionable things in whole idea of social science, because the social science somehow we took the many ideas from the perspective of the West, but it can't define the non-Western countries, because the non-Western countries, they are making and developing their own way of understanding in international politics. Like China, for example, the Chinese media, like CGTN, Xinhua, CCTV. I mean, in recent times, they are really making their own narratives rather than the Western media or even any other country's media's narrative. And that's the way they try to show to the world. Let's say, I mean, if you really want to learn from China or about China, then learn from the Chinese media. Let's say, for example, I know that one of the countries of Chinese engagement or scholarship or many other tools is Pakistan. So for China, I mean, if we took from the 2017, like after the China-Pakistan economic corridor to till now, I mean, one thing is very common from Chinese perspective. China want to develop a model country to show the whole world, look, if you want to make a good relations with us, we want to do these things, what we are trying to do in Pakistan. Let's say like, okay, we, of course, we have a many criticism to identify those things, but in a common perspective, especially from the Chinese perspective, they want to show, yes, we want to invest in Pakistan. We so far we have a plan to invest from 2017 to till now more than $62 billion. Whatever we did or not, that's another question. But we're trying to develop these things. We're trying to show like, okay, we want to make a model of cooperation. We want to show like, okay, maybe some Western country denied, let's say in Afghanistan, but we have our own policy. Let's say in Myanmar, China is trying to make their economic zone in Rakhine State. Maybe we can criticize these things. We can say like, okay, the China, because of their economic investment, because of their economic, let's say the plan in Rakhine State, and it is the reason why Rohingya people, the Arakan people, they need to be killed or murdered in their place because it's a Chinese interest there. But from the Chinese perspective, they're basically doing their work. They're basically doing and developing their economic attraction. Let's say like they have now the plan to make their port and their engagement in different places in Bangladesh. And also they had a plan, whether they were success or not, in Sri Lanka, we know very well. So all of this thing, China, why they are doing this thing? Because they want to make a model. They want to show to whole world, we are making our own cooperation. We are making our own attractions from our perspective. It is not important like we have to take the philosophy, we have to take the theoretical replication from the West or particularly from the American perspective. We don't need it. even to some extent, as I said, from the, if you look from the critical perspective, let's say India, for example, India, they are now doing a good investment in Bangladesh. And that investment from India's perspective, they're trying to develop the whole world. It's a soft power. They try to say like, okay, because of us now, the Bangladesh economy is growing. Because of us now, Bangladesh political situation is more stable. That's what they're trying to take credits. That's the way they want to make the whole world, let's say, like our style of soft power. Even apart from that, like in a last good number of years, India, they invest let's say more than 500 billion million dollars in many African countries, and through, especially through the IPSA. IPSA is just a informal group, like for example, we can say like a CPEC, for example. So they just develop this kind of IPSA free, like BRICS, for example. And the way they wanted, they made their own style of cooperation. I saw many, let's, for example, we have a one project to see African people in many African countries, especially the students and people from Africa, how they see the rise of China, India, Turkey, Iran, and Saudi Arabia. The interesting thing is here, for example, from that, when we have discussion, let's say like, okay, how do you define the Chinese style of soft power? It's just fully of economy, but if it is comes to India, it's full of culture. And if it is about Turkey, it is full of humanity or humanitarian interaction. If it is about Iran, it is just full of, let's say like, okay, if they have some specific religious background, let's say if they have some belongings with Shia or that doctrine, then they love to see that Iran's rise. If they have, let's say like, okay, any kind of specific idea or somehow they linked with the Salafist methodology of religion, then they have more belongings with Saudi Arabia. So that's the way that the phenomena is changing, because we know in a recent years, especially in the last 10 years, the world's the world's perspective of politics is totally changing, because it's now more multipolar world. It's more, we can say like in every region, we will see different kinds of powerful state. For example, in recently, just last year, we worked on a country, actually on Pakistan. We just try to see the two countries. One is Pakistan and other is Turkey. We try to take them as like a middle power. So it's important to define, okay, like how we define the middle power. There is a mini debate about that, because some scholars, they say that power, power like in economy. For example, maybe we can take to some extent like let's say Japan or maybe South Korea. Some countries, they are middle power because of their culture. Some countries, they are middle power maybe because of their military power. So whatever, we are trying to take, let's say like Turkey and Pakistan, to see in a whole theoretical framework, let's say like, okay, the military engagement, military trainings, military deployment, military cooperation. So from those perspective, it was one of the good identification, let's say from Turkish perspective. Let's say like Bayraktar is a good example. I'm sure all of you know about the Bayraktars and its engagement, or we can say the drones, Turkish drones, its engagement in many conflicts, from Libya to Ukraine, from Ukraine to Syria, from Syria to Iraq. But actually, Bayraktar or drones is a tool of hard power. Am I right? It's not a soft power. But if you see, for example, in a Ukraine, when Turkey they send their weapons like Bayraktar, uh, the people, they changed even the children's name, just like the name of Bayraktar. Even they made a song, listen, because they made it, they saw it as like an attraction rather than as like a hard power tool, rather than it looks like a weapons. So that's the way to Turkey, for example. In a recent, we know this, that it's not all about the drones. It's all about the military engagement in many part of the world. But the whole phenomena that developed from their own perspective looks like it's more on soft power issue rather than hard power issue, because of their military cooperation. Let's say like Nagorno-Karabakh. That's the one of the another example. The Turkish engagement in Nagorno-Karabakh. We have to see from different perspective. Of course, if we ask the Armenian people, maybe they can argue, they can say like, no, it's a full of Turkish hegemony in the region. But from Azerbaijan and their history, and also from the ontological perspective of the history of Nagorno-Karabakh, it's very clear the engagement of Turkey, what they did is a full of soft power. But it's actually the hard power thing because they involved in a war, they involved in a conflict. But from the other perspective, they involve and engage this whole phenomena just because they have only one interest, they have only one way. They try to show to the whole world, look, if we have a cooperation with us, we can do our best in that particular region. We can do our best to establish our own phenomenon. For example, let's say like in recent times, if we look the Southeast Asian countries, let's say Indonesia, Malaysia, for example. We can talk more about, I mean, of course, Singapore, but I think out of the Singapore, now many other countries, they're doing their own philosophy and they're doing their own placement in international politics. For example, now China, in one way, we know that China, we can define it from many scholarly debates. I mean, it's as I said earlier, some may say like the Chinese way of trade relations or economic cooperation is a full of uh, debt trap, or some said no. I mean, it's not about a debt trap because it's whole like the China is trying to do this trade relation because they need to develop their own attraction in those particular countries. Let's say like just 2 days ago, the Malaysia, they now think like, okay, they're now rethinking their foreign policy. They're thinking like, say, they need to do more things to engage with China. For example, now it's a multipolar and multiplex world. And like some scholar now working on this idea, like, okay, which world we are living now? I mean, is this world a multipolar world or it's a multiplex world? So let's come to this point again. Like, how do we define this multiplex world? Because let's say like some countries, like X country, when they're making their relations with Y country, they somehow they may have some conflict because of security. They may have some problem because of economy, but still they have a very good cooperation because of science and technology. For example, let's say in many European countries, they may have very good competition with China in terms of economy, in terms of security. But one thing is very clear: they really have a very good cooperation in terms of science and technology. And that's the point. That's the difference of the contemporary world politics. Because if we look from the Western or American political international politics, America don't love to see any countries will make the relations which America have problem. Like say, for example, I mean, we can take an example like the United Kingdom and China. Once upon a time, they want to make a relations of 5G, the 5G internet and that cooperation of science and technology. But USA wasn't happy about that, and that's the way they make an impose on United Kingdom. Let's say like if you do these relations with China, then we'll cut off our relations with you. I mean, and we'll never look like okay, whether you are our allies or not. And that's the way United Kingdom, they need to stop to make a good 5G generation and agreement with China. So it means that USA, their way of perspective, let's say USA, they want to see a country from the unipolar lens. But on the other hand, many countries, they're making their relations not unipolar lens, rather in a multiplex lens. They see like, okay, we may have a problem with China. We may have a problem with Iran. We may have a problem with Turkey. We may have a problem with Korea. Whatever it is, we may have an economic problem, but we can do our scientific relations. We may have a political problems, but we still can do our technological relations. And that's the way we need to define this international politics. For example, I think let's say like the last time the India's movement, like India, we know have problems, let's say with USA in terms of their support to Russia, let's say. And from the India's perspective, they try to define like, okay, whether we really need to do everything what West is saying to us or what US is trying to tell us. Maybe we can criticize this India's role. We can criticize like, okay, what is India doing is maybe positive or maybe negative. That's another part. But from the perspective of the non-Western countries, it's very clear like these countries, whatever is India or Iran or Turkey or South Korea or Japan or Australia, even also like said Malaysia, Indonesia, these all of the countries, they somehow try to develop their own way of understanding of relations. They're not totally looking at the exist international order. Of course, like we may have another discussion, like okay, then what would be the future of international politics? Have seen, look at the every country they're trying to. Every country means like maybe it's an emerging power, or maybe it's a middle power, or maybe it's a great power countries. But all of the countries, they're trying to make their own strategy. They're trying to make their own policy to define their foreign policy, to define their interest. It is good to some extent. It is also disaster. It is also dangerous for future of international politics, because we have a many understanding in our exist discourses of international relations. Let's say like okay, if there is too many multipolar world, too many multiplex world, we may have seen, or we will have see more conflict, more war, more problems, more crisis. That could be another discussion. Let's say like okay, I mean making or having this kind of countries good soft power or good power of bonding strategy, like China or like many other non-Western countries. Is it good for society? Is it good for international community? That could be the good discussion, because I mean, if we look from the scholars, let's like even especially the scholars, pro-Western scholars, one thing is very common. They say like okay, the future will be very dark, because now we have so too many multipolar world, and we have a too many confrontation, because nobody is agree with each other. Every country, they're trying to make their own decision, and it's a problem, because it is not making a consensus, it is not making a cooperation, rather than it is making more confrontation. For example, let's say like okay, we have seen so far like the European Union, they are really threatened because of their future. What will happen their future? What kind of impact they may have from the perspective of, let's say, from the Russia, especially the Russian aggression on Ukraine. And also we have seen that to question the international community's standard by taking example like Israel and Palestine. So Israel, let's say like they are not following any exist international law. So there's a very big question in international politics. So for example, if Israel can do this tomorrow, any other multipolar world, because every region, we have seen every country, they have some power. Some countries, they have military power. Some countries, they have economic power. If they start to utilize their power from their own perspective, then how we can make a consensus? For example, let's say like, okay, the USA, after or during the Second World War to till now, one thing they did very good, especially in the European and Eurasian countries, and also to many Middle East and North African countries, to give huge economic aid or development assistance. For example, let's take from 1950 to 1955, just only some couple of countries in Europe, including Turkey, Italy, Belgium, and Norway, for example, then Netherlands, Austria, these all countries, they had $12 billion from US, and US invested these things. For example, Turkey from 1950 to 1960, they were Democrat, they were the member of the NATO, they had a very good role in international politics, especially from the Western perspective. Why? Because USA built that community. But now what we have seen so far, we have in one way, let's say like, okay, if we take a Chinese Belt and Road Initiative in a positive way, China is making their community, but here China have another problem with the exist international society, because the problem is here that China is not providing a policy that we can make. We can say like, okay, the future world will be like that. The future world, future international world will be like that. Anyway, so I mean, these are the different kind of phenomena we have to identify what is going on in non-Western world. I mean, I just try to give some example to identify the region rather than talk on theory. So that's why I give example on countries, tutorial countries like uh, China, Turkey, Iran, Saudi Arabia, because then we can understand like what we are trying to mean, what we are trying to identify, power of bonding, what we're trying to identify the multipolar world, what we are trying to identify the the non-Western countries' strategy of public diplomacy. Of course, let's say like, okay, we can define those things from positive perspective or negative perspective, but it is exists. Still it is rising. Still it is here. So we cannot deny such thing. So I don't know. I got a message. Again. Uh, I hope so. I mean, that's the, I mean, whole phenomena. Like when we are talking, like why we need a non-Western international relations, why we need a non-Western soft power strategy, why we need to identify the power of bonding, not from the Western perspective, not from the Germany's perspective, not from the France's perspective, not from the American perspective, not from the Australia or Canada's perspective, because every country they are trying to develop their own way of strategy. They're trying to develop their own way of cooperation and collaboration and engagement. For example, in my last book, I want to take just 5 minutes probably. I hope so it will not take too much. Let's just only from the book, what I did the last 2 chapters. For example, I did some coding analysis, and that coding analysis tried to define from the from the four perspective. Let's say like the China and India from the comparative perspective. Let's say in economy, in politics, in diplomacy, and in culture, how they are engaging with other countries. So I basically try to reach with the diplomats, politicians, journalists, and academicians from both countries, let's say from China and also from India. And also, I mean, like, because I did this work, how it has impact on particular countries like Iran, like Pakistan, like Bangladesh, for example. So I try to also reach the same way, like the politicians, especially like foreign minister, like diplomats, and try to see how they define this kind of soft engagement. For example, let's say like, okay, when I'm asking to Chinese diplomats, they have very interesting thing. They say like, okay, the China, they have more patience in compared with West, and they define this patience from their history. They say like we have 5,000 years of civilization, and from that perspective, West may don't have this kind of civilizational history. So let's say if we want to be a superpower, or if we want to be a unipolar powerful countries in the exist system, we can wait. We can be more patient, because we have a our history told us to be patient. Our philosophy, let's say Confucius philosophy, our philosophy told us like to be patient. From the, let's say, from the India's perspective, that's also really interesting. From the India, I mean, let's say they may have, they are very, I mean, from both countries actually. When I talk with the policymakers from Pakistan and also from India, one thing is very clear. I'm sure all of we are very knows about, I mean, very well known with this fact, like Kashmir issue or different kind of border issue, different kind of interest oriented issue. But apart from that, one thing is that said from the elite policymakers or elite powers, they say like, okay, we are happy to make a bonding. Let's say like India, probably they are not targeting Pakistan, but targeting like other small countries. Let's say like as I talk, I mean probably in many example like Bangladesh, they just made these things and to define their own way of interaction. So the overall idea is here, I mean, we have to see like how their elites, how their politicians see their relations, whether it is a power bonding or it is another hegemony. And also like, okay, then I also to try to see the last 10 years of idea from the, let's say, from the Pakistan's perspective, like Dawn, from the Iran's perspective. Let's say I just try to analyze IRNA, their newspapers, and try to make a coding analysis to see the what kind of words they used for making cooperation, let's say, especially with China. What kind of words they give more emphasize, what kind of cooperation they have so far, what kind of leaders, let's say, discourses and narratives they developed so far, especially in the last 10 years. So that was the one of the argue, like, okay, that's why I stole, like, okay, the Pakistan and let's say China, it's just one of the good example of power bonding, because they're trying to develop such thing. We may see this, we may debate, may criticize something for future, because the international politics is always changing. You cannot see it's always changeable. So the policy will be, so it's or till this arena, we can understand one thing. Yes, there is a power bonding, And power of bonding we have to see from the non-Western countries. Let's say from Africa, we have to see, let's say, the how South Africa making their engagement. So that's good. That could be the good exam, good way of discussion. And I'm sure we'll have more discussion if you have question. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Nazmul Islam. I'm sure our students are having some questions regarding your very insightful talk on very abruptly changing power dynamics. So I'm opening the floor to our students if they're having any question to ask. Anyone? Yes, please.
First of all, I wrote down a couple of questions, but my first question is
Sadia
that
Hujam, could you please, because the sound is really, I'm not sure, maybe it's so far. I hope so. Maybe, I mean, especially your microphone. I mean, could you please just talk like the way?
Professor, I'm just taking 2, 3 questions and then I'm going to convey to you. It would be much easier
Okay,
for
okay,
us.
that's good. That's good.
Yes,
Great.
Rasool.
Thank you.
before World War II, European countries colonized countries of continents like in Asia and Africa. It was a direct rule. But can we consider China can colonize certain other countries by indirect rule through economic means? Is it the new imperialism or is China the new colonizer that is going to control the world through economic means? Second question is that as you mentioned that Saudi Arabia from 1980 to 2015 was focusing more towards religious power as their soft power, but after 2015, if I'm not wrong, after NDS Mohammed bin Salman, they're taking certain liberal perspectives into their soft power. So is liberal ideology the only way to promote a soft image for a country, or there can be certain other means? Thank you.
Any other questions?
जी बेटे किसी और का सवाल है
उर्दू में कर लो, कोई इशू नहीं है.
Does EHM strategy
EHM.
plays a role in soft power
You
projection?
can ask in Urdu, no problem. I understand Urdu. Don't worry.
Yeah, that's why I offer them if they can ask in Urdu as well. Ji.
Does EHM strategy plays a role in soft power projection for the countries? And if it does so, why the countries affected by it are not understanding this concept?
Affecting by not understanding this concept of EHM.
Those countries which are affected by the EHM strategies, why they aren't able to understand this concept?
Unable
So I
to.
don't-
Any other question? Okay, I think we can
Next,
get the.
the financial institutions like that of the IMF and the World Bank, does they play a role in soft power projection for the developed countries?
जी हाँ बताइए.
Ma'am, I did not understood how is Iran is promoting a soft image. I do understand that Turkish media like TRT, the state television, and Al Jazeera, they do have a narrative that is a counter narrative against the Israel and Palestine conflict. We do have that narrative, but I did not understood how is Iran promoting a soft image, because Iran is mostly perceived as a country that is highly extremist. Because they use religious strategies according to the media, but we do not have if correct me if I'm wrong, but we do not have a counter argument towards their soft image. Like we do have for Turkey and other Middle Eastern countries, but I did
You
not.
mean to say Iran is not having any such project?
Yes, I don't think so. They have a soft power, soft image.
Okay. Any other question?
Yes, Mr. Samir. Madam, my question is under the perspective of hard power and multiplexer, how US is affecting Pakistan, China, Iran, or Pakistan-Iran relation, and how China is affecting India-Maldives relation.
How India is affecting?
How China is affecting India-Maldives relation under the perspective of hard power.
Any other question, student? Okay, I think in the second round we can have your question as well. So, Professor Nazmul,
That would be great. I think
going to
we
communicate about
can do 2, 3 questions, then we can take later if
another
we have. Your questions.
So
Yeah.
our student Kusum asked that India, okay, it's China. Before we know that during colonial period, so many colonial powers like United Kingdom or Italy or before that other
Uh,
colonial powers, they were
Sadia
direct.
Hojam, I don't know, like so far because I don't hear you. Could you please make it's more loud?
Audible now?
You
Can
are
you hear?
audible. You are audible, but the sound is coming from I don't know, very far.
Is it fine now?
Is still same, but
Is it still same? Is it echoing or what?
Students,
Is it echoing, Dr. Nazmul San?
okay, okay, it's good now. It's good now. It's good.
It's
Please.
clear now. Okay. The first question is about the neocolonialism. China's intervention economically or through trade routes. Is it similar to the intervention through before previous colonial powers like United Kingdom, like Italy, like Germany, like France? Any resemblance in it? Is it going to have the same effect?
Okay. I think I can start. Maybe we can
Yeah,
take questions later. Yeah.
yeah, you
Okay.
can answer this question.
Okay, thank you so much. I mean, as I told you, probably you hear that one. Actually, we are working now on this project. How or whether soft power it could be the another tool of new colonialism. So that's a good debate. I mean, to define, let's say, the soft power from the colonial perspective, and if there is another colonialism, then will it be the same colonialism what we have seen before? Uh, as we always remember in international policy is always changeable, as I said at last of our point. So we cannot say like, okay, I mean, we what we will see in future, it will be static. But here is a thing, of course, it will not be the same way what we have seen, let's say, during the British colonialism or during the French colonialism or many other countries, because the formula wasn't or is not same. So what does it mean? It means, let's say, for example, I mean, we are talking the colonialism from the hegemonic perspective. Let's say that from the Gramsci's cultural hegemony. So Gramsci's cultural hegemony, what does it mean? We have to look here. I mean, Gramsci's cultural hegemony, it could be one point. I mean, to make a control of other countries' institutions, to influence the people's opinion, culture in a controlled way. So now here's the question. So we want to take the China. So far, China is not interrupting like that way. China is not doing, I mean, let's say like, okay, they are not going to other countries. Yes, they're doing their business and trade. They're doing their economic cooperation. They're trying to do also, I mean, utilize their cultural vehicles to utilize their movies, their language, their sports, their media. But here is the thing, this so far is still now, they didn't use any kind of formula to change the view of other countries' people by force. Let's say like, okay, how we can define then the by force? It is one of the indicators to identify the hegemony, whether X country, let's say China, whether China influenced other countries' political parties or elite institutions, let's say bureaucracy, let's say, for example, politicians. So yes, some critics have so far come, let's like, okay, maybe China have a really good influence on Pakistani politicians. I mean, there is a good debates about that. But from the other perspective, I mean, one is the influence, but other is to change their policy forcefully. If it is happen in a forceful way what? Let's say from, if we want to take from American perspective, USA, they have huge or many examples. Let's say like, okay, if they have confrontation with other countries, they are very easy to utilize their force to change that particular country's political power for the sake of soft power, for the sake of smart power, for the sake of power bonding. That's the important, that's a critical thing. I mean, we cannot say whether China will do, I mean, China is not now, but maybe China will do it future. But so far, China is not doing that thing. Okay, we are utilizing our force. I mean, if you want to, I mean, this political party, they should come to the power. If they are not coming power, then we will not give our investment, because the Chinese strategy is totally different. Let's say if we want to see the China is going to the Africa, and they are making and they're trying to their best to work with, I mean, let's say most of the time, every political parties, whoever comes to the power, they're happy to work with them because they don't have any target to make or to have their role in politics directly. I mean, if you want to be critical, we may find out something. Of course, I mean, there is no spiritual countries in the world. We can say like, oh, that could be the great example. But in reality, of course, so far the China is not interrupting in other countries, especially in terms of politics. So that's why we cannot say like the Chinese way of soft power so far is a new colonialism tool. But in future, if it's moved to hegemony, let's look how it will move to hegemony. That's one of the critical thing. Uh, the China, the India, even to some extent Turkey, for example, Saudi Arabia, Iran, South Korea, or those countries, middle power and great powers countries, they are not providing us any rule-based international order. What does it mean? It means, for example, if we talk about the USA, we can criticize them massively. We can say like, okay, USA, you are talking about liberalism, but what about human rights in your country? What you are doing in Iraq, what you did in Afghanistan? We can ask many things because they provide us, let's say, so-called international law. They provide, we know so-called international system. We may have some international communities, so-called, let's say, we have, but we don't know what would be the future of international system because we don't know. There is no specific rules about that. There is a very good book has published recently. I'm not sure whether you follow because it's not from our field. It's actually from the economics department. Antitrust. So the book's name is Antitrust Law, and the author of that book, he defined actually contemporary economic system in a very good way. But I will define it from the political perspective. I mean, actually, she wrote this book and she defined, let's say, like China, Europe, and what's the name? Let's say like China, US to her child. You know, when she wrote the book, finally, when she will write the acknowledgement, during that time, her child came to her and asked her, "Mom, what you are writing?" And she was thinking. She said, "How I can define my child because she's just 10 years old. She will not understand the complex things in international political economy." Then she explained to her. I think this is important for us. She explained to her child like that way. She said, look, I mean, there are two childs, they're playing in the ground and they're playing football. So one child is called European Union, other child is called USA, America, and other child is China. And the two childs, European Union and USA, they knows the rules of the football. They played very well. They knows how to kick the ball. They knows what the foul. They knows the every rules of the football. But the China, the kid of China, she suddenly came and she played from around here to there. She kicked here, she made foul. She just, let's say like, say any rules. Even she don't maintain the exist rule. You got my point? She don't maintain the exist rule, and also she's not giving us any opinion what would be the rule. That's the problem. That's the problem for the future of international politics. That's the because we are afraid. As a from the scholarly perspective, we are afraid because China is coming. It's true. There is no question. I mean, China is trying to building their policy in here. But the thing is, what would be that rule-based international order? How we can define that order? Because China is playing from every side. Because it's true. I mean, from their interest, they're doing great things. I mean, they are doing for their country's interest. It's positive. But from the world's perspective, from the Pakistan's perspective, from the Turkish perspective, from the Iran's perspective, from the Bangladesh perspective, from the Nepal's perspective, how they will see this rise because they don't know the rules. They don't know what would be the rules in future. So that's the big question, and that's the way we can say like yes, if China is not providing a good rule-based policy, then we will see more chaos and conflicting international politics. And that would be the another tool of new colonialism. But again, it will not be the same what we have seen in our past, like British colonialism or like let's say the Francis colonialism. Yeah, please, thank you.
Thank Thank you, Dr. Nazmul. The second question is about Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, MBS policies of reforms. Is it also considered a soft power projection of Kingdom of Saudi Arabia?
You mean this modern? I mean the Saudi Arabian policy. They are trying to, I mean, take a more liberal
Yes,
foreign
Mohammed
policy.
bin Salman policies.
Yeah, Mohammed bin Salman's. I mean, this again. We have to go like how we are defining soft power. I mean, you see here we have debates in here to define soft power. One defining from the Western perspective, especially the father of the soft power, Joseph Nye, he defined soft power, but basically from the Western liberal perspective. He's also another new liberal scholar. So he defined the whole idea of soft power by looking how America want to see their soft relations, attractive relations with others. So if we want to take that phenomena, that theory and philosophy as a tool for the Saudi Arabia, of course, they're developing their soft power. Of course, Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia is trying to be liberal from the Western phenomena, from the Western philosophy. So, I mean, as West already defined, it's a soft power. Of course, it's a soft power. But the question is here, I mean, are Saudi Arabian people ready to take that soft power? Are the Muslim countries, are they ready to take that kind of tools of the soft power? That could be the most interesting question, because we are not, I think that would be the really good works. I mean, in future, let's say the Saudi Arabian, this kind of liberal policy, this kind of liberal Western philosophy or policy that they are taking in their domestic level, what would be the impact this kind of policy on other Muslim countries? Because as I said earlier, the from 1980, let's say to till 2015, Saudi Arabia, they made their foreign policy basically based on their specific ideology, especially when they are making their cooperation with Muslim countries. Probably most of the times it's based on economy. Probably most of the time it's based on religious, but it's a Salafist ideology or Wahhabist ideology they built up from the long term. But now they are trying to, I mean, let's say they are trying to make a new identification of their philosophy, of their relations. So we have to look let's say how Saudi Arabia will make this kind of cooperation with other Muslim countries. Here is a positive thing for Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia, they're not targeting the whole Muslim countries. They're trying to develop their own domestic policy based on that liberal, let's say liberal tools, but they have target the next Gulf countries. Let's say like they're targeting to make this kind of same attitudes and behavior on Kuwait, on Bahrain, on let's say like the small Gulf countries. So that's the way they want to make example. So yes, I mean, as I said earlier, I mean, of course, it's a tool of the soft power, but the soft power, when it has a problem with the traditional culture and traditional, let's say like exist customs, how we can define that this kind of soft power? I mean, probably Saudi Arabia is a challenging time. It's a transitional period. So during the transitional period, we cannot come up with a conclusion, but we can come up with this point. Saudi Arabia, they may create a good example for a Muslim countries, or maybe they will make much more chaos in future, especially much more crisis in terms of cultural soft power, in terms of religious soft power. So that could be the good identification of exist Saudi Arabians soft power. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nazmul Islam. Thanks to our students as well. But I'm really sorry, because of time constraints, we cannot entertain more questions. Definitely, in some other session, we would try to accommodate more of the students. I would like our Deputy HOD and Cluster Head of IR, Bahria University, to come and conclude the session and say a note of thanks to our esteemed guests.
First of all, I would like to extend my gratitude to our esteemed guest speaker today, Dr. Nazmul Islam. I tagged you on my LinkedIn post also. I found out your LinkedIn profile with the help of Dr. Sadia. Thank you so much for enlightening our students about power of bonding in non-Western emerging date power, soft power strategy. We already had a talk yesterday at our department about the public diplomacy and the significance of the soft power. And yet another talk, I think students have really enjoyed your talk. And again, this is, you were talking about the importance of perspective. And I think Dr. Nazmul Islam has given you a unique perspective, a non-Western perspective. I would like to urge essentially on the non-Western perspective, because whatever we as a student and scholar of international relations, we are more focused on the Western oriented literature and readings. So it is very, very important to have the knowledge collaboration among the non-Western countries, and particularly like from Turkey and from the Asian countries. So thank you very much. And I look forward to have these kind of collaborations in the future also. And I would really like to invite you in Pakistan. So if you ever get a chance to come to Pakistan, and we can have you in person and get the benefit out of your experience and exposure and research, of course. And then I would like to thank Dr. Sadia for arranging this session for the students of international relations, and all the best. Thank you very much, Dr.
So by this note of thanks, again, thank you so much, Professor Nazmul Islam. Inshallah, bidha or böyle bir şey yapacağız. O zaman size Pakistan'da da çok hoş geldiniz. Ne zaman müsait olursanız sizi bekliyoruz buraya.
Teşekkür ederim. Teşekkür ederim. Tabii. Her zaman.
Hadi.
I'm also very thanks to you. I'm really thanks to, and also, thanks to the head of the department, Professor. And would love to see you actually in Turkey, and also all students you are, and also colleagues. I would love to talk with you more, and you are always welcome. Whenever you will come to Ankara, just send me a message, and also we'll have a more face-to-face contact. Love to talk more. Thank you so much.
Students to Ankara Yildirim University and our faculty members as well.
Yes. Right. I'm sure we'll have more collaboration.
Thank you so much, sir. Thanks a lot. Take care.